Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I'm your host as always, Professor Prime. So let's talk about math and Final Fantasy 2. Focus will be on the gameplay, but I do intend to talk about the story a little bit. So you're free to assume spoilers ahead if that bothers you. Either way, I wanted to let you know. So let's just jump into it. Again, spoilers ahead. So with Final Fantasy 2, uh, it's just like right off the bat, it establishes Final Fantasy is a series where it's like, well, this does not have to actually be a sequel in terms of the narrative to the game before it, but it gets that anthology idea across. Um, but with that in mind, let's talk about the gameplay and kind of go at it from there. So to do that, I'm going to talk about like the first game because the second game is a departure in some ways, while also being still getting at the same thing at its core. Um, you'll see what I mean if you haven't already played Final Fantasy 2. So with that first game, the idea was like, you had a job system. You had your four warriors of light. They each had their own job. Those jobs can get upgraded later on, and those jobs had their own stat advantages, right? And the idea is like, you're trying to dish out damage while trying to not take it, or you want to at least be able to either negate it or be able to recover from it. And the idea is, you're gaining experience points, you're leveling up, and as you are progressing in combat and leveling up your characters, you're progressing through the story, you're progressing through the world, right? You're practicing resource management in and out of battle. You're getting different weapons, you're getting different equipment, and you're able to boost your stats even further than just leveling up, right? And all the while, you have your characters with their different jobs in battle, and you're able to coordinate that. So that was the big idea. And not every game has a job system that's Final Fantasy, but and we're gonna see that that is the case with the second one. But they still have that idea at the core where it's like whether we're talking about old school Final Fantasy or new school Final Fantasy, turn based or real time, party, and like you traditionally see in a lot of RPGs, or just one character. The idea is you are dishing out damage while trying to not take it, and you're boosting and building your stats and progressing through the game. And with Final Fantasy 2, right, we see a departure from that job system, and some people, they may like that, they may not like that. If you play some other Final Fantasy games, you may already be used to that idea, but Final Fantasy 2 does some different things, right? So at the end of the day, you are still you know gaining resources and building up experience points, boosting your stats and all that. But it gets a little different because, like, we're in Final Fantasy, that first one, like Final Fantasy One, and a lot of other Final Fantasy games, you have an overall level, right? You have your experience points, and you're building those, you're building your stats, and you're building your overall level, right? Because you might like start off at one, for instance, but maybe you get to 99, right? Or in some games, 100. Um, what maybe not Final Fantasy. I don't. I'd have to think about that. But my whole point is like, right, you start off at one level and you're gaining them as you go, right? Um, you still level up, but not overall in that sense. In two. So what do I mean? You have this idea that by doing certain activities throughout the game, you can level up different stats, right? Like, so, after a certain amount of wins, for instance, maybe your HP grows, right? Or, by taking down some opponents, like physically, you, might grow your strength stat, for instance. Or by using magic often enough and against enough opponents, maybe you increase your magic stat. Or, and by using specific types of magic, like you increase the power of that magic, you increase the level of that magic and the damage that you're able to do. And I think that's fascinating. And I feel like it could be divisive, but like what's interesting to me is the presentation, right? Because you're still leveling up. You're leveling up your magic, you're leveling up your stats and your weapons as you go, and you're doing these activities that you would be doing anyway. But they like have this more outward effect, whereas in other games like Final Fantasy, you're doing a lot of stuff too, and you're boosting it up, And it's like so yeah, it's just like it's fascinating, and it's like it reminds me of like EVs from Pokemon, where oh, I'm doing this specific activity and it's boosting this specific stat, and then that's all of Final Fantasy 2. So you don't have levels overall, which by the way deeply disturbed me. And I know that sounds like I'm joking, but I'm not joking. I'm like, I don't know how I feel about this, but here's the thing, right? It still gets at the same, because you don't same thing. You don't have that traditional overall level. But what's happening when you do have the level explicitly told to you? Uh, your character's stronger, they're faster, their stats all around are still there. So like if I have some character and they're like level 87, for instance, right? Like that from like level 5 they've gained so much in terms of their different stats, and you have a better idea of what they can do in battle. Here, you're just seeing the stats, you're not seeing the overall level, but the idea is the same. And just again, like it's how it's presented. And I can see it rubbing some people the wrong way. I get that. So it's just like it's a very different feel. And I think that's fascinating. And as far as the story goes, meh. There's more of a story there than the first Final Fantasy. But just to be clear, I'm not saying it as an insult. Like the first Final Fantasy had a story. It had a definitive story, like beginning, middle, and it went a very traditional route. But it wasn't like super immersive, and you can argue that that was the point. With two, they did have a little bit more going on. The characters were not feeling that silent protagonist sort of mode, and so you had a lot more going on there. Um, I don't think the big bad was interesting in any way, and it says close your head in the beginning, but I don't think it matters as much. But I so there was an interesting part towards the end of the game though, like again spoilers ahead, um, where it's like the big bad is painfully boring, but then he does go to hell and takes it over. I mean, we don't see how that happens. I would have liked to see that, but it happens, right? And and he comes back, and I think what's interesting though is like the way, because I've been playing so many. I've been like playing and like replaying so many Final Fantasy games this year, especially like in this last month. Um, and but I think the idea was like two is that there is a weapon that you have to. There's a specific sequence in timing that you have to ask the character something and then go get the weapon, and it's a very very missable weapon, but it makes the last boss fight like less painful, because the way that last boss fight functions, and again, like I think this is in two, because like there's some elements of two and three that I'm jumbling together in my head, but I think this one, yeah, it's like you go to hell and you fight the big bad, and the way it's set up is you can dish out damage, but like not enough to kill it in like one shot or anything, and he could always like drain you, and then some like ways that are proportional and not in a way that you want, and it's just like to a point where it's like really hard to kill him. But there's a weapon that allows that to be a little bit more evened out, but again it's missable. However, it's not the end, because like if you have like sorry, curse, that allows you to be able to dish out some sufficient damage, and it's a lot harder for the opponent to come back from. So it's like if your levels are high enough and you got curse on your side, then it's a nicer fight to have. If you miss the weapon, I think like the blood sword was it. But anyway, so Final Fantasy II was interesting partially because um, it presented the way you progress through combat in a different way. But also, there was no set job class, so like you could tailor what you wanted your characters to be, right? Because it's like, hey, well, I want this character to be a beast with magic, so maybe I'm just gonna have them use like magic all the time, right? Or like, hey, I want this character to be a beast, like I'm on that more physical level. So it's like, right, so you can tailor your characters where it's like they don't have jobs from the start, but maybe you have them be more like a mage or more like a warrior. But if you wanted to go a more balanced route, you absolutely can too. So it's like there's a lot of freedom, a lot of customization, and a lot of math just across the board. So yeah, Final Fantasy 2. It's a good game. It's different. It's divisive. It's good overall, and I don't think I've seen that exact system show up in a way that resembled that in other games for Final Fantasy. Right. So interesting.